Your next area in financial management is capital structure part 2. So what do we have here? Here is a complete structure. Let me just show you what we are going to cover. We are going to first discuss optimal capital structure, determination of the lowest WACC and its application to capital budgeting. Then we will discuss different types of assets, current, non-current asset structure, loan covenants, restrictive clauses we discussed in our previous lecture as well, and how it affects the capital structure, growth and profitability, some ratios related to these. Then we will discuss a very important topic, leverage. There are two types of leverage, operating and financial. We will discuss, and we'll also do some examples with numbers to explain the idea. And then we will do also a very important topic, valuation of levered firm. And then finally, the impact of capital structure on financial ratios. So let us start first with the optimal capital structure. Now look at this graph given here. On the x-axis we have debt upon equity, which is of course a measure of leverage. We already know that. And on the y-axis we have the cost of capital. So basically a firm desires to have the lowest weighted average cost of capital. The optimal, when you see the optimal capital structure, that is the one that results in the lowest weighted average cost of capital. We can take some equity, we can take some debt. So combining debt and equity in such a way so as to achieve the lowest cost of capital. Now the problem is, we know, and we learned in our previous lecture, that debt is the cheapest source of finance because interest expense is tax deductible. Interest expense attracts tax saving for us. Thereby, its low cost means when we combine this with equity, the aggregate cost can be brought to a low point. The problem is that when we issue more and more debt, it will raise the risk for investors, not only for the bondholders, but for those who have invested in our share. So both bondholders, the debtors and the equity holders, they will require a higher return. And you can see that these curves are now swinging upward, showing that as the leverage goes up, the risk goes up, so the return required by the various investors also go up. Our goal is to hit the point where we can attain the lowest weighted average cost of capital. Unfortunately, even we can see that this is the point where the debt to equity ratio is 4, and at this point the WACC is the lowest. Unfortunately, there is no way to identify this point precisely. So a firm should at least establish a certain range within which it can achieve the lowest weighted average cost of capital. Now the next point here we need to learn is that how does WACC affects capital budgeting? Capital budgeting means investment in long-term projects, acquiring a business, expanding your productive facilities, and so on and so forth. The problem is that we tend to use historical WACC, which is not right. Historical weighted average is not appropriate. Instead, we should use the new cost of each additional source of finance, new equity, new preferred stock, or new bonds. So new WACC, the new weighted average cost of capital, that is what should base the foundation of our investment evaluation, not the historical weighted average cost of capital. Since new projects would be funded through the new sources of finance, so it makes sense to use the new weighted average cost of capital. Now next topic is the asset structure. This is a pretty straightforward area. So basically asset structure is the composition of assets on the firm's balance sheet. It is split into the current assets. Of course, we know what are current assets. These are the assets that provide economic benefit within 12 months after the balance sheet date, and we know what current assets are: inventories, account receivables, prepaid expenses, cash and cash equivalents, marketable securities, and so on and so forth. When you say non-current assets, also termed as long-lived assets, these are the assets that provide economic benefits beyond 12 months. So they are long-term investments, intangible assets, goodwills, deferred tax assets, property, plant and equipment, and so on and so forth. Now, how are they funded? Of course, debt and or equity. So the important point here to learn in financial management is that current assets should be funded through current liabilities. You cannot construct a building by just taking an overdraft, right? So Overdraft is used to pay to your account payables for expenses payments in our daily operations. And non-current assets, if you want to construct a building, that might require issuance of bonds or issuance of shares. So remember, long-term assets are to be funded by long-term sources of finance, and your short-term and current assets are to be financed through short-term sources, short-term liabilities. That's an important point to note. Then we have our next area, and that's, I think, we've discussed this influence on capital structure, that these funds, they affect your capital structure, how they have been financed, and what asset is being created out of these funds. Next is loan covenants and capital structure. Those who provide funds to the firm, they want to protect their interest. So if the capital structure is heavily equity based, for example, if 90% of the funds have come from equity and only 10% from debt, so that would mean that debt holders are not in such a danger. So in these situations, maybe the restrictive covenants called the loan covenants may not be required. Debtors are not in trouble here because the proportion of debt as compared to the total assets are very small. But the problem comes, so when equity is a major part of the capital structure, it's not an issue for the fund providers, for the lenders. But when a situation is like this, when equity is just 5% and debt represents 95% of your capital structure, this would mean that there is some serious risk for the fund providers. In such circumstances, the loan covenants, restrictive clauses, they will be more stringent because there is more risk for the fund providers or for the lenders. Next, we have growth and profitability. Yes, investors, fund providers, creditors, lenders, they want to see growth. They want to see profitability. And both growth and profitability, they are highly influenced by the firm's capital structure. So we have some important terms to discuss here. First, the growth rate. Growth rate here means the growth in the company's earning. This can be calculated using this formula. Return on assets we'll discuss in our later slides. Let us explain the idea of retention. Let's say a firm earns $100, and out of this $100, only $20 is given to the shareholders as dividend, and the remaining $80 is kept. This $80 or 80% is what you call the retention ratio. So if the firm retains more earnings into the business and pays little dividend to the shareholders, it means when the retention ratio is higher, you will have a higher growth rate. And this idea is nicely explained in this example. A company calculates return on assets to be 7.5% in the current year and follows the policies of paying 40% of all earnings as dividend, which means 60% is being retained. 60% is retention. Calculate the company's expected growth rate. We have just learned the formula. First, the return on assets, that is 75%. Sorry, 7.5%. Multiplied by the retention rate, that is 60%, upon 1 minus return on assets into the retention rate. If you just calculate this all, it will give you 4.7%. Now imagine if you have more and more being retained, then this would mean that you have higher rate of growth for the firm. 4.7 is the answer. Continuing with profitability, we have some ratios. There are many measures for gauging the profitability of a firm. Return on sales, return on investments, return on assets, return on equity. They're quite self-explanatory. Income before interest income, interest expense and taxes is what percentage of sales. So this will help us assess our operating performance, how much operating profit have we generated out of every dollar of sales. Return on invested capital, this is normally used in decentralized organizations where we want to evaluate the performance of our different divisions. Return on assets, the total assets that a firm has, we may adjust the denominator for those assets that are just either not being used. And return on equity, net income upon average total equity. Important point here to be noted that whenever you are linking an income statement item with an item from the balance sheet, the balance sheet numbers are averaged because income statements is for the whole period. So the balance sheet numbers must be averaged. So that will be on annual basis or period to period comparison. So how does our return affect our capital structure? The more we earn, the more we can retain, and then it could result in a larger part of our capital structure going towards the equity component. Next area we have is leverage and risk. Leverage affects the variability of company's profits. It's basically a measure of risk. There are two types of leverages. One is operating leverage. Operating leverage is caused by the fixed operating cost. If we have more rent to pay, insurance, property taxes, large amount that goes into paying the salaries, etc. So when the fixed cost is a major component of your cost of operations, then we say that this business has high operating leverage, and it is good, fine. It's no problem when you're paying a lot of rent or a lot of salaries. If this market is good, if your revenue is good, you will be able to make good use of this operating leverage and you can make sizable income. Problem comes when there's a market downturn. Your fixed cost will have to be covered. Decrease in sales can significantly lower your profitability, and that can severely impact your business long-term sustainability. So leverage is good as long as the market is good, financial or operating. Leverage is good if the market is good. If the market takes a downturn, you will be in a serious trouble. How do we calculate the operating leverage? Operating leverage can be calculated by dividing the contribution, which is sales minus variable cost, that is unit contribution margin, multiplied by the quantity of units sold. That will give you the total contribution, divided by the contribution minus fixed cost. So to put it in simple words, this is your pre-fixed cost income, before fixed cost income, which is also called contribution, and this is your post fixed cost income, means the contribution minus fixed cost. So contribution divided by the earning before interest and tax gives you the operating leverage. If you have, let's say, just let me explain the formula. Let's say if you have earned $100,000 contribution, but after paying fixed costs, you are left with just $5,000. Where the hell $95,000 go? It was paid to cover the fixed costs. So you can just imagine the leverage, operating leverage 20. Most of your profit has been taken away by the fixed cost. Not bad, as long as if you're earning more, you can generate higher operating income because of operating leverage. Now we have another type of leverage called the financial leverage. It is caused by debt, and interest on debt has to be paid even if you may have no profit or no cash. You may have to borrow to pay the interest. So if you are unable to pay, there is a risk of bankruptcy. This is how we calculate the financial leverage. EBIT is earning before interest and tax upon EBIT minus interest minus preferred stock dividend upon 1 minus tax. Preferred stock dividend, since they are given on after tax income, so in order to add into this denominator, we have to bring it back to pre-tax number. So preferred stock dividend divided by 1 minus tax percentage, this will give us the number that is the pre-tax basis, and then we can deduct it from here. So what we basically have, earning before interest and tax, let's say it's $100,000, but when we pay interest from this, when we pay the preferred stock dividend before tax number, it falls to just $20,000. Where the hell that money go? It was used up to pay the interest and the preferred stock dividend, which have the similar nature that they are both fixed. So the higher the number, the higher is the financial leverage, just like in the case of operating leverage. Operating and financial leverage can be combined through total leverage. Total leverage is equal to operating leverage and the financial leverage. And if you don't know the formula for total leverage, you can devise one. Remember, this is contribution. Contribution upon earning before interest and tax, EBIT, multiplied by EBIT upon EBIT, which is basically contribution minus fixed cost. I can write it this way: contribution minus fixed cost minus interest and minus preferred stock divided with 1 minus tax rate. So if this EBIT cancel out, what you have is the contribution, which I just told you, it's Q S minus VC. Then in the denominator, contribution. What is contribution? Contribution is Q into S minus VC. And then you just simply write this down, and then you can reconcile what we have: fixed cost minus interest minus preferred stock dividend divided by 1 minus tax rate. Now if you just compare this with what the formula is, you will see they are the same. So this is total leverage, contribution, 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 fixed cost, interest, and of course the pre-tax preferred stock. So remember, total leverage is equal to operating leverage multiplied by the financial leverage. An important point that should be discussed here, that a firm that has higher financial leverage means it has got higher proportion of debt on which we have to pay a fixed amount of interest. Since interest expense is a fixed amount, and if a company is able to make good use of this financial leverage, company can make a lot of earnings, and these earnings will then be available to the common stockholders. So you can expect that when a company has high financial leverage and company is able to use this financial leverage well, it would result in more earning per share. That's an important point. Then the last area is the valuation of a levered firm. So levered firm versus unlevered. Levered firm is the firm that has debt in its capital structure. Unlevered firm means the firm that is run entirely on equity. And this is how we can calculate the value of a levered firm. Value of an unlevered firm, the firm with no debt, entire equity, plus present value of the interest tax saving. Now this is interesting. Since interest is a tax allowable expense, we discussed this in our previous class, it is valid for tax purposes, tax allowed expense in other words. So those firms that have issued debt, they will pay interest, and that interest will be tax deductible. Whatever you save in the form of tax expense because of its tax deductibility, if you can calculate the present value of that interest tax saving, combining these two will give you the value of a levered firm. How do we calculate the present value of the interest tax saving? Let's say if T represents the corporation tax rate, R is the interest rate on debt, D is the amount of debt. So using this formula, you can calculate the present value of the interest tax saving. So this is the saving that a levered firm will have, and if this added to the unlevered firm valuation will give you the value of levered firm. We will try to explain this idea through an example. The value of a firm with no debt in its capital structure is 130. So that's basically the value of the unlevered firm. The company has recently issued 25 million in debt at an interest rate of 5.75. So how do we find the value of a levered firm? Value of a levered firm is equal to the value of unlevered firm, that is $130 million. And to that, we simply apply the formula. Tax rate percentage times the coupon rate times the amount of debt upon the coupon rate. Now the line is missing. Tax rate in this question, an example, is given as 30%. R is given as 5.75. Debt is 2.5. So if you just plug in the numbers, 130 million plus 0.30 times 0.0575 times 25 upon 0.0575. If you solve this, give you a total of 137.5 million. So this is the value of a levered firm, and this part 7.5 is what you get as a present value of interest tax savings. Next, we have impact of capital structure on financial ratios. First, the concept solvency, I'm sure you would be familiar. Solvency is the ability of a firm to pay long-term debts when they become due. If you compare this with liquidity, liquidity is the firm's ability to pay its current obligations as they fall due. So there are some tools, some ratios we can use to measure the solvency. First is the total debt ratio, debt to equity, equity multiplier, and times interest earned. These are the formulas. When you say total liabilities, these are current and non-current combined. So let's say if a firm has a total of $80,000 worth of liabilities, whereas the total assets are $100,000, that means your business is 80% funded by loans, current and non-current. Good or bad, you may discuss, you may argue, depending upon the specific business and the type of industry. Ideally, lower the ratio, greater is the level of solvency, and higher the ratio, lower is the level of solvency. As you can see, 80% is quite a high percentage. So this firm has lower level of solvency because the ratio is higher. Then the next is debt to equity ratio. So instead of using total asset as a denominator, you can use equity as a denominator here. Like total liabilities, we take the same number as 80,000. And the equity, you can simply see if total liabilities are 80, Total assets are 100. The difference between assets total and total liabilities is equity. So equity is 20. Now look at this, is a very depressing situation. For every $1 invested by the common shareholders, there are $4 that have come through loans. So this business is highly levered. So that's the idea. You can compare sometimes with the assets or sometimes using the equity, whatever you want to measure. Then we have equity multiplier. Taking the same example here, our total assets are $100,000, out of which $20,000 has come from equity and remaining $80,000 has come from loan. Dividing this with total equity, it gives you 5. Equity multiplier is quite high. It means if you have $5 worth of asset, only $1 has come from equity, rest has come from debt. How well you use it depends upon how efficiently the assets are used. And since the significant earnings are available for the common stockholders, because we just have to pay a fixed amount of interest, the rest of the substantial earnings are for the common stockholders. So using debt carefully can multiply your equity, can increase your equity, and of course more profits would be available for the common stockholders. Last, times interest earned sometimes is called the interest coverage. It is earning before interest and tax. Let's say our earning is $15,000 and the interest expense is $3,000 only, which means my profits are sufficiently large enough that I can pay my interest 5 times. Even I have to pay just once. So time interest earned or interest coverage is a measure of how comfortably a firm can pay its interest expense. So that completes your financial management module 2, capital structure part 2. We will explain these concepts in much finer detail through questions and through the TBSs.